started if you guys don't mind. Mainly because I'm too excited to stay up here and be quiet any longer. So we'll go ahead and get started, and others may continue to come in. There are some seats still up front if anybody wants to sit down, and I promise it doesn't mean you have to do anything in the presentation. I'm actually going to ask everybody in the room to participate. One of the things that I love is when you call something a workshop, that means it's not a keynote. A keynote is somebody's on a stage somewhere and they're talking to you. And a workshop means, like, I get to ask you questions too, and it doesn't mean you have to answer just because you're in the front row, because I see friends like Carolyn way back in the back, and I can call her by name. So I wanted to talk to you guys a little bit about consumer engagement and sort of what it is and everything. But before I get started with that, and before I even really introduce myself, since there's lots of new faces for me in the crowd, I wanted to ask you guys to help me understand sort of where you are. So first, let's ask on sort of consumer engagement. Who here actually has a farm that produces something that goes directly to a consumer? Wow, there's a lot of you guys. All right, so who here does commodity kind of farming that feels like it goes through some processing? Good numbers there too. Okay, how many of you guys are kind of what you would consider on the ground floor of consumer engagement? You haven't heard a lot about it, but you're kind of just intrigued to learn a little bit. All right, we got some of you guys. How many of you guys kind of feel like I've learned a good bit about consumer engagement, but I still need to learn a good bit more? Okay, that's a lot of you. And who thinks they should be up here with me because I have another mic? If somebody thinks you're an expert, I'm not sure I'm an expert, but I have some expertise. No volunteers. Okay. I wanted to make sure I gave you plenty of time on that one. So my name is Janice Person, and I work for Monsanto. And as my new friends up front said, I got on a watermelon skirt because Monsanto sells seed, and one of the crops we sell is watermelon. And a lot of people don't know that about Monsanto. And it's been part of what we've been trying to do for the last 3 years is to help people understand Monsanto and agriculture the way those of us from inside see the way agriculture works. So the people we're talking to are those nice consumers, lots of us city people. Several of you guys have met me before, and you know that I was born and raised a city girl. My family is still mostly city people, so my sisters frequently forget that my company sells watermelon seed and stuff. They know we do agriculture. And I can remember at one time, because I was the only person in agriculture, that meant whenever they saw anything farm related, that was going to be my Christmas present. No, seriously, so when I lived in New York in a tiny apartment that I had no room in, I got like a cast iron John Deere tractor. I wasn't sure what to do with that. I've been given the Farmer's Almanac a million times. And so when you think about consumers, a lot of times we think about people like me and my family, people who, until I got into agriculture, I'd never even gone out to farms. My parents would stop at produce stands, and we would feel like we had really countryed it up, you know? And we always bought lots of black-eyed peas and stuff. We're very Southern. So when you think about consumers and consumer engagement, I know we talk about it a lot in agriculture, but I wanted to stop and kind of help you understand sort of what it's like outside of agriculture. I'm somebody who travels a lot. And when I travel, I fly. When I fly a couple of different airlines. How do you pick which airlines you fly? Well, the biggest factor is what flies into my town, right? What's there, what's available. But then from that, you look at prices, you look at this, you look at that, who's got the routes, who has fewer nonstops, all that stuff. But what makes you excited about an airline? Anybody got any moments where you were excited about an airline? So if my friend Marietta was in the room, she told me earlier her suitcase got lost on Wednesday and she still doesn't have it. So she's very excited about an airline. I flew on Southwest on Christmas Day, and the person that was doing the speech and telling you to put on your seatbelt and here's what happens, they sang most of it, and then they did the rest in jokes. So that's consumer engagement, right? Like they made it so that I wanted to listen. Even though I'm on flights all the time, they made me so interested. I'm like, what is she going to get to rhyme with the slide? How's she going to work that into a song, right? So that's really consumer engagement. And now when you look around in the US, more and more companies are doing these things. It's not in agriculture, was not the first line. How many of you guys really like potato chips? And I expect anybody from Idaho to put their hands up. Okay, pretend at least, because I made the mistake of once getting corn chips for a meeting that was in Idaho, and it's not the same. But potato chips, like Lay's is now engaging consumers in choosing what flavors they're going to introduce. How many of you guys noticed that Lay's introduced like 5 new flavors? And they said, this is only going to be for a few months. If you really like these chips, make sure you buy them. Put your votes in so we know that's what our customers want. That's what they're getting from other areas of food, and that's what they're looking for when it comes to where is our food raised. That's kind of where consumers are today. And they're not really sure what all happens on the other side of the farm, so we're going to talk about that for a bit. And really, I've got some slides here. I want to work through the slides, but then I hope that we have a really rich dialogue. Like I see a lot of people in here that know a lot, and people who look like they have questions a good bit. And I would love to be able to have more of this like exchange of information, because really I've been learning on this stuff for a while, and some of it is because I sit down with farmers who've already done something different. Like maybe you've brought out a blogger on your dairy or something, and you could help the rest of us learn from your viewpoint. So when you look at that consumer and farmer situation, right? So how many of you guys farm in really rural areas? Places where people like me, when we drive down the street, are scared to death that we're going to have a flat tire, right? Because I don't know what to do. And I can remember when I moved to a place like that, and I ran out of gas, like a month after I lived there. And I called the police station because I didn't know what to do. It's dark, it's the middle of the night, you're in the middle of nowhere, and what do? Right? So a lot of consumers don't feel really comfortable when they come to your neighborhood. They kind of, like, it's a 3-hour drive to get there. They're not used to driving for 3 hours, right? They're 30 minutes and an hour, and it's all in traffic. And then when they get out on those highways where we're driving our trucks, we might go a little bit faster than they do because we know every nook and cranny in the road, and we know where the potholes are, and we go around them, right? So these consumers are, this could easily be my sister's family. My sister is in computer engineering. My other sister is a school teacher in the city of Memphis. My youngest nephew has a passion for food. He has now turned 13, and for Christmas, all he wanted was things like cooking lessons. Now, I gotta say, 13-year-old boys, when I was a teenager, did not want cooking lessons. I mean, seriously. As a matter of fact, I can't imagine very many of them spent any time in the kitchen other than opening the refrigerator, standing there looking at it, trying to decide what to take out, right? But when my nephew was 7 years old and I went to Portland, Oregon for the first time that he could remember, he told me to make sure I went to Voodoo Donuts, because he had heard about those donuts. And she's like, hello, eat those donuts. I can see she's like, oh my gosh. So, you know, kids learn a different kind of thing about food now. My nephew, when he did a flat Stanley, have any of you guys familiar with flat Stanley? My nephew's flat Stanley, and I love that there's a little kid's hand back there. My nephew's flat Stanley went to the Penn State Meat Lab because I know people at Penn State in the meat lab, right? So, and my nephew found that really amazing that you could learn that much about meat that wasn't from a grocery store. So consumers have this different enthusiasm, and right now what's been happening over time is they get on Facebook and their friends who really like food are talking about it all the time, or they watch TV and they watch the TV shows where they're talking about it, and they read books. And it may be Michael Pollan, and I'm not sure how many of you have watched some of Michael Pollan's work on Netflix, but you know what? He goes out and he talks to a farmer about the pig that he's going to roast. I love a good pig roast, so, I mean, it seems reasonable that I would like the show. And nobody realizes that that's giving them a small piece of agriculture. They just know that they're hearing from a farmer. And they don't realize that maybe that farmer doesn't represent all farmers. And so part of what we're trying to do with consumer engagement is help them better understand the diversity of farmers. So when you think about it, most consumers are going to connect with a brand. So my nephew was connecting with Voodoo Donuts. I connected with Wheat Thins or something, right? Those are then part of a big company usually, so Wheat Thins is part of Nabisco. And then Nabisco is probably getting that from commodity brokers, things along that line. You start seeing how many barriers there are between farmers and consumers. And what happens is it kind of gets fuzzy. When you're a consumer and you're trying to see where your food comes from, how do you understand where the wheat and Wheat Thins come from? But you're hearing a lot about wheat online, and you're hearing a lot about gluten online. And so you start getting a little bit worried, a little bit nervous. And you talk to a friend who has celiac, and she can't eat wheat. So it becomes one of these things that starts building on itself, and it's almost like a snowball that starts rolling. But only until they have a connection point where they can ask questions will they do anything. So if you think about it, I had problems with my roof, which God help you, don't have problems with your roof. But, when you have a problem with your roof, what do? If you know a roofer, you ask that roofer. If you don't, you ask your friend, have you ever used a roofer? So if you have questions about food, where do you go if you don't know any farmers? And that's what we're trying to help people do, is kind of make that connection. Now what happens in reality is looking from the farmstead over towards consumers, we don't always see what they're doing very clearly either. So we can kind of see, here's what we're seeing from the brands that are serving them. Here's what we see in the news. We're seeing these documentaries that don't reflect what we're doing on my farm. My farm doesn't do that. Or I've never thought about that. So we have trouble really understanding where consumers are too. And it kind of starts feeding back and forth. So really what consumer engagement is trying to get a little more clarity and get rid of some of those barriers in between us. And if we can do that, we're well on the path to enlightenment, I would guess. So what kind of helps us go through that? I would say talking about personal stories, your farm. So you guys, I said I work for Monsanto. You mentioned the name Monsanto, and 75% of Americans don't even know what that means. But the 25 who've heard it, they may not know it from the perspective of people in this room. And they certainly wouldn't know it from the perspective of an employee. Right? So how do we get past that? Part of it is me willing to stand up and tell people, hey, yeah, well, actually, I work for Monsanto. I had a conversation with a chef one day, and we were talking about food first. I didn't bring up Monsanto. We were talking about food. We were in New York, and she was really excited about the location. We were in a place called James Beard House, and if you're a chef, James Beard Awards are what awards chefs incredible awards. Like if you're a top chef, you get a James Beard Award, and you're like, it's like a Nobel Peace Prize in their minds. Like it's incredible. And we were in James Beard's home in Greenwich Village, and we were both kind of giddy with excitement. And she was asking me some questions. We were talking about sustainable meat. And so she was talking about rabbit and goat. And she knew a lot of Americans don't eat rabbit or goat. And I actually said, well, my favorite rabbit recipe is rabbit enchiladas. A farmer who grows my rabbit for me actually gave me the recipe. She was like so wanting to hear my story. She's like locked in on me going, tell me what's in that recipe. Tell me what else. And then later when she says, well, what brings you to the meeting? I said, well, I work for a company called Monsanto. And she started laughing hysterically because like the whole conversation we had had about food and what I care about and what I eat never would have matched up to what she thought about a person from Monsanto. And so me putting my personal face on it, I love that I'm entertaining you that much that you get to talk to me back. But since I was putting a personal face on it, that's what grabs her heart. That's what grabs her and makes her want to stand there and talk to me. Now, I will tell you, she did run across the room, find her husband, drag him back, and then tell him, she works for Monsanto. No, seriously, she gave me a business card. It's got her name on it, and it's got the logo, like the Monsanto. So putting a personal story, so I would say things, lots of us have learned incredible things from our parents and our grandparents, aunts and uncles, when it comes to our farms. I get to share my story a lot of times. I met, my first farm was a guy in Louisiana named Mr. Ray Young. And anybody who works in cotton in the South probably knows of Mr. Ray. But I know a lot of what I know about soil because that man made me want to learn. He made me inquire about what he's doing. And that was really kind of the moment through which I went, I want to work in agriculture. Because before that, I could have gone anywhere and done communications work, but Mr. Ray caught me. So part of that is you have to make something entertaining a little bit. Not like all of us have to do parody videos like the Petersons. I love the Petersons videos though. And I mean, Greg and them know I love them. They're awesome. But that's not for everybody. I'm not going to sit down and write a parody video. But what can I do that will kind of intrigue people? Yesterday, I got some pecans from somebody, and I don't see her in here. But somebody had their new crop pecans, and they'd done like a little candy coating, candy pecans with Mexican chocolate. But you were there, and you tasted them. And so for me to share that this farmer had their first crop of pecans in, and they gave me an opportunity to taste their new candied pecans, the number of people on Facebook that are like, oh my God, I gotta have some of those pecans. And I'm like, but she's not selling them yet. So when she gets up a farm page that sells them, I'm trying to help create the buzz because really they were some of the best pecans I've had, and I've had a lot of pecans. You had them, right? They were fantastic. So if you could do something that's unexpected, one of the things that I've done is help people think. So most people have only heard one perspective, and if they've heard about GMOs, was it like, hallelujah, thank God they accepted GMOs? Maybe not. So sometimes I actually, if people talk to me about GMOs, I'll ask them, do you mind if I tell you about my favorite GMO? And they kind of look at you like you either like simple-minded or something, you know what I mean? But they usually go, oh, go ahead and give it to me. Tell me this one. And I can tell them about the American chestnut tree. I don't know how many of you guys are from the eastern U.S. How many of you know, see, my friends here from Michigan, they know about my new friends, about the American chestnut tree. But the American chestnut tree, in the early part of the century, of the 20th century, it was found to have a blight, and it was beginning to erode those trees. I don't know, for people out west, you may not know, but the American chestnut tree was like as amazing as the sequoias and the redwoods. And so when it grew in forest, it was massive and it was tall. And when it would grow out on a field by itself, it's got this incredible branching possibilities. And you can just imagine eating picnics under that. For generations, that's probably what happened in the South because we didn't have air conditioning and it was pretty dang warm in the summers, right? But so the people at the State University of New York actually have figured out how to get something from wheat that is able to resist the same blight and put it in that tree. So we have the potential to reforest the eastern U.S., the Appalachians. Now, how many people have heard that story about GMOs? Yeah, so how many consumers do you think have heard about that kind of GMO? It's just, it doesn't happen, right? How many people in here learned about your soil on your farm from family, picking it up, maybe ripping up the roots on a plant and talking to you about what the soil is like on your farm and how they hope it's better when they give it to you when it's your turn to farm? That's not what people hear about farmers. And it doesn't matter whether they're organic, conventional, or GMO. What they're hearing is one small slice of farming, and people are really worried about soil. Well, I can tell you we're really worried about soil health too. But for me to come in and say, me too, I'm also worried about the soil health, doesn't make it sound as good as if I send a picture of a friend who's pulled it up and is telling me about their soil. or when I actually take a picture of somebody doing soil probes and checking out what fertility looks like. The amount of information you guys have on something like soil is amazing. You really, I want to make her happy. I can't help it. It's like I can't have a critic in the audience. But when you look at it, the kinds of things that we can do with consumers is really talk about the food that they eat. Things that we're doing that impact them. One area they really care about is food safety. How many of you guys have a food allergy somewhere in your family? It feels like everybody does these days, right? And when you have a food allergy, how closely do you look at the food that's going on the plate? More and more people have that close level of scrutiny. And some of them aren't sure what's caused the food allergy, right? It's kind of hard. It's a lot of science. And usually your doctor doesn't go into here's what may have caused it, so much as here's what you need to avoid. And so for people, they're having trouble understanding what else do they need to be worried about. Because maybe they didn't ever hear about any food allergies in their family before. And I would hate to tell you, my friend Val, who I don't think is in the room, her son has a protein. Oh, there she is. She is there. Her son has an issue with processing proteins. And as a cattleman, I don't see Mark there, but as somebody who raises beef, it's pretty much the darkest day when you find out for the first time your son will never eat a steak because their body can't handle the protein. And so your heart goes out to them. That's what's happening online, is people like Val will go online and try and find answers, try and find solutions. And not everybody has a master's degree in science. Not everybody has a PhD. And some of the things that you find are way over your head. So when you suddenly find somebody who goes, I've had that problem in my family, you kind of go, wait a minute, what can you help me with? And Val's had people come to her the same way because she shared his story online. And that's where you start having people who are so worried about everything looking for answers. So food is a big piece. I would tell farmers, like a lot of time, we talk about what we grow as our kind of mainstay on the cash side, what we're doing for an economic reason. But I have really good friends who have like 4-H chickens for their kids. That's agriculture, and that's something that more people can connect to as consumers. Sustainability in the earth is a big piece of this equation. So people want to hear about food, they want to hear about the environment. That's where kind of talking about how you conserve water, what you're doing to make sure that the land is better for the next generation, all those things come into play. And then there's all these weird questions that you can get. Sometimes when you're talking to somebody, they don't care so much about food. What they really care about is science. And they really want to understand the science, but nobody's ever broken down like agricultural science for them. They don't realize that people get PhDs in soil and water relations. And we can help them understand those things. So at the end of it, here's what we're trying to do, is just get us kind of moving in a little bit closer together. Try and take down some of the walls that are in between us, and really realize that it's all about individuals and families, and everybody's got a different story. Nobody's story is better than the other necessarily. Some people may be able to tell a better story, but that doesn't mean your story doesn't matter just as much. So I know that we've got various states that are represented in the room that are doing things like blogger outreach, that are doing dinners on the farm, that are doing some amazing things with kids in schools, that are kind of getting involved in the moms of preschoolers. What we need to do is kind of find those communities where people are asking the questions, and before they ask the questions, we're there as a genuine member of the community. So you can't only show up and talk about farming. Because if you're only going to talk about farming, why would they listen to you? Because most of them don't talk about farming every day, and they don't have questions about farming every day. They have questions about the environment, they have questions about food, they have questions about daycare, they have questions about, can we get this nice sweet darling to sit quiet and not break your necklace because I'm worried that she's pulling it too hard, you know. But those are the kind of things. So I would love to like just open it up for questions, and I hope you guys hit me with some stunners that I don't know how to answer. And I know some of you guys have questions. Megan, there's a mic over here, and if you're on this side, we could actually run you this little mic. So you don't have to get up and move in front. Oh, hey, yay, you win.
I'm supportive of you very much. You really hit home with something that I've always been very interested in. In Oakland County, Michigan, a county which is perhaps the best county in the United States.
They get a fight going on.
We introduced something called Vegetable Gardening University, in which we introduced people as an outreach to growing their own food, and it's open to the whole community. It wasn't just open to Farm Bureau. And we also tried to introduce legislation. We just introduced it to have educational programs introduced to high schools. Now we have an educational bus that is being introduced to the state of Michigan, where they go around to each school introducing to urban schools all throughout the state. I think Grand Rapids is the first one. Where they're selling in each community and arranging it with the schools for several days, where we have an educator and everything. It's a farm, and then of course many of the places throughout the United States have the Rural Education Day, or Project Red, which is another way of outreaching. And getting it, and especially with the idea that food is so very important, and I think you get people interested when they have a sense that they have some power over the food they get, not just hoping somebody shows up, but they have some say-so themselves in what they can do, and by educating themselves and giving the tools by which they can empower themselves.
Oh, I'm with you. I think the gardening program sounds amazing. Yeah. So most people, when they decide to garden, they learn how complex it is, right? They learn how much you need to know when a challenge comes in, disease, insects, whatever. I grew my first plant of broccoli last year. I don't know if there's any broccoli farmers in the room, but Lord love you, because it was a mess. But I think gardening programs are a perfect example. We actually have one where we're picking bloggers who really like to garden and trying to pair them in with some farmers and things that also like to garden, so everybody gets to learn from each other.
Yeah, and just reaching out to people who are not ordinarily into agriculture like that.
Right, and I think part of what you're talking about there, you know, the people you're reaching out to largely are not people who are anti sort of farmers or anything. We get this impression because we hear from a lot of people. We read like these weird things online, you know, magazine articles come out, and we go, how could they have come to that realization? There's really a small percentage of Americans that have those bad feelings, and we've just decided, let's focus on the large percentage of Americans that necessarily could be our friends, or they could be susceptible to that misinformation, and finding some of those people to engage with is really important. Yes?
What communication channels do you think will be the most important in the next couple of years with communicating with your consumers? Do you think that's social media? Is it one-on-one communication with consumers? What do you think will be the most powerful way to communicate with them?
So I would say one-on-one and social media are both important. I think what's becoming more important is video.
Okay.
And really good photos, right? So a lot of Americans don't have a lot of time to read like the big in-depth PNS or social, science magazine things, but they do have time to like look at funny videos and interesting things. I mean, I saw a picture of carrots being harvested, a video of carrots being harvested, and the number of people that shared that on Facebook was like viral. And there's nobody talking. It was a short video of a machine that was harvesting carrots. And yet, it's so compelling to watch it again and again because I've never seen carrots harvested that way. So I would say video without any channel, or firsthand interactions. When you let somebody experience something, it changes the way they see everything. We took people to a bell pepper farm, which, I mean, I love bell peppers, don't get me wrong, but I never would have thought that that would be the thing that women would tell me. They think of it every time they go to the grocery store. It's been years already, and they still remember that day we went to the bell pepper farm. And it's life-changing for people when they get that first-hand experience.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah. Keep coming. I know some of you guys, yes, have some other questions. Oh, I know.
Sure. Okay. So in grocery stores, we see a lot of.
That is way up high.
Sorry. So in grocery stores, you see a lot of non-GMO verified project labels, and those are the big ones. And if you look a little closer on the other ones, you can see this might have GMOs in it. And so there's kind of like a hot topic on labeling. How do we balance the perception of labeling so that one doesn't take away from the other, and we use that as a tool to engage your consumer?
I'm pretty sure if I had to answer for that, I would be getting a major bonus and a huge, I will tell you, so I think there's a difference in looking at it across the entire grocery store kind of platform versus looking at how you change that conversation with friends and family, right? And part of it is people have never heard what GMOs really are. It's whoever made up the terminology of deciding to call them GMOs was pretty smart because it sounds pretty weird, and why would I want GMOs in my food any more than I want DNA in my food? Like, it just doesn't sound good. And I know there's DNA in food. But a lot of people have never really thought about that, right? So GMO for us, we kind of fought it for most of us in agriculture because it's not a very precise term on what we mean. And in the meantime, instead of helping people understand why we wanted to talk about it differently and things along that line, we let people move forward with the idea of GMOs. So now we have to accept it. I think now what we need to do is help people understand why I don't look for the non-GMO label when I shop. Here's what I really prioritize when I'm grocery shopping. So instead of telling people it doesn't matter, what I typically do is tell them, you know what, here's what matters to me when it comes to a label in food. I know I need to eat protein in the morning and eat fewer carbs in the morning so that I can power my way through the morning because I'm not a morning person. You know, I know that I was getting like too much sugar, so I've looked at those things. Here's why I don't want GMOs included in that kind of label, and help them understand that it's not something that impacts their health, and if it was, the FDA would have it there. That's what that conversation keeps going back and forth on. So as other people proposed mandatory labels, we didn't think mandatory labels were needed. And people basically just heard us pushing back against that idea. They didn't hear why we didn't think it was needed. And I think we have to continue to tell the why. Here's why GMOs don't need to fit into that. Now, I'm all in favor of voluntary labeling. What I think is bothering most of us in the room, if we're bothered by this, is that it's misinformation. So some of the things where it says no GMOs here and there's no GMOs in that whole crop or anything anyway. But, you know, you can understand a brand can get a premium if they say non-GMO. They're getting paid more money and they're not having to pay more for the ingredients. I mean, you know, for a crop that doesn't even have not GMO, it's really easy. And the premium that's paid to farmers is it's not nearly what the brand marketing side of it is, right? So I think trying to help people understand, and I really do, like the first time I saw M&M said partially includes genetically not engineered products, I shared it on my Instagram and said, I love M&Ms. I am going to eat me some M&Ms, and I'm happy that they have genetically engineered components in it. Because for me, I would pick those things. Like, I know that if somebody came out, and my nephew, one of my older nephews, buys something called Spoiler. I don't know how many of you guys know about that, but my nephew's, like, in ROTC, He's going to be a Marine, so protein is a large part of our lives. He lived with me last summer. So he wanted to make sure he was bulking up, and so when he came back from the gym, he would have a protein drink. It sure made my heart happy that Soylent was the one he picked, because they're proudly using GMOs in their products. So we're like, everybody is Soylent. That's our favorite of the protein shakes. How about other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I come from Oakland County along with Frank, and we are the best county because if you look at your picture there, that's kind of us. And only make the city part bigger and the farm part a lot smaller. And yet we seem to have quite a lot of agriculture in our county. Our farm does farm tours in the fall. We do school field trips. And we found years and years ago to focus on preschool and kindergarten because every kid comes the parent. And then we get the parents too, along with the teachers and all the other people. And I will tell you one of our common questions. The kids all go out on a hayride, pick pumpkin, and the parents all say, "Are these pumpkins edible?" And I think, what are you going to do with it? Well, they're going to make a jack-o'-lantern. Well, every pumpkin's edible. You can make pumpkin pies, so right along with that, I have to give recipes for pumpkin pies because it's not the same as opening the Liddy's can. So we engage with the public that way.
Oh, that's fantastic, because I think for a lot of consumers, the only time they go to a farm is when they do a pumpkin picking, or in the Northeast, it's apple picking, or, you know, there's various things that people take in pride in. I know peaches are big in part of the country. So wherever we can get people who are working in those kind of farms to help share the story, I know that they feel a lot of times like, wait a minute, I grow a lot of fruits and vegetables, and I don't want to have the GMO conversation all day. And I totally understand. I also don't want to have the GMO conversation all day. What's happened for a lot of us, though, is once you've had that conversation with individuals, they stop asking. Those individuals feel comfortable with you and your farm and your choices, and then they don't have to ask the same questions again and again. I know you've got a question, too. It's her dad's birthday. She wanted to make sure I let you guys all know that. But I think when you look at those of us who do have that proximity to consumers, where we could help them have better information is part of what Monsanto's been trying to do. And I loved it. I had a chance to sit down with some of the leadership of AFBF yesterday, including Zippy, and there's a real interest in finding out what else we can put in the hands of people to share information. One of the things that we talk to people about that's astounding to them is plant breeding and what you get out of plant breeding. And so we've talked about, you know, teosinte was the corn cob that was this big, and now here's what our sweet corn looks like. We've talked about the fact that broccoli and kale and cauliflower all came from what was wild mustard. So it's all from the same original plant, and it's this person liked the taste of the leaves, and so they went down a different path than the person who liked the flowers. And those kind of things are really easy to talk about, and it doesn't get into really highly controversial conversations. It just helps them better understand agriculture overall. I think when you look at it, it's amazing the power you guys have with those relationships one-on-one. I think we have time for another question or two. Yes, ma'am.
How do you start a blog?
How do you start a blog?
Or can you do it, you have to have a web page, or would you consider that through making a posting public in Facebook?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we've talked a lot about blogs and different conferences, and I would say the reason a lot of us start a blog, and if you're in New Mexico, I can probably help you find somebody who could sit down and do that with you. The reason a lot of us want to have a blog per se is we own that space and we can put whatever we want to there, and we can come back to it again and again. And I'm looking at several friends in the room who all have blogs, and like one I have is about, you know, what do farmers do in the winter? Every winter, that's going to be a good blog post to share, right? And it's easy to find. If you put it on Facebook only, finding it is hard. And Google, people love to go to Google and search for things, and then they'll find it that way. But I would say it's pretty easy, and if you want to start it, there's actually free ways you can do it, so you wouldn't have to pay a lot of money. Now, if you want to sell your products online, you're going to have to do a website where you pay a little bit more money for it. But it really is pretty much as easy as writing an email for the most part. There's some things you have to do on the front end to make it look good, but usually you can find somebody in your community that has a little expertise and maybe trade them something for it. I've done a lot of resumes in my life in order for somebody else to do something for me or whatever, so there's a little bit of that back and forth. But part of what makes a blog nice is people can sign up to get your information, and you don't have to wonder when Facebook's going to change that feed algorithm again, where they'll never see what you share. And so it makes it nice. And you can also decide what's public there a little bit easier. And most of us that have blogs also have a page for our blog. So everybody can find it as a local business. So we set it up with like your zip codes and things like that too. So if people start looking for local farms, they might find you as well as somebody that has a different kind of farm operation. Does that help? And if you want to stay around, seriously, I can talk you through some of it, and probably she could too. All right. Before I let you guys all go, I want to tell you, I've got a few copies of this book, and I only brought as many as would fit in my backpack, and people who saw how heavy my backpack was know. I can send one if I run out of them. But this book is called Farm to Plate, and it actually talks through sort of the kinds of things we talk with consumers about. Sort of, what is plant breeding? What are GMOs? What is it that we're trying to do with water and things like that? So it may be useful for some of you guys who are trying to decide what to get into it and just understand at what level. Because, when I talk about sustainability with a scientist, I'm going to talk on a different level than somebody who only had 8th grade science, right? So this is written more for just mainstream America, and I've got quite a few of them up here, and I'd be glad to send anybody one directly. And occasionally we've had people ask for a few extras of these at home, and I'll be glad to send those to you as well. I don't know how many of you know Monsanto has a website. It's discover.monsanto.com, and we try and answer any questions people have about us as a business. We're also trying to answer questions about modern agriculture that sort of relate to us. As a company that works with everybody that does conventional, GMO, and organic, we kind of like to try and take the neutral ground wherever we can. We just want to make sure that it's not taken at the risk of somebody else's production practices. Oh, look at that, another face in the background in there. All right, so thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it, and I hope some of you enjoy these books because I don't want to carry the heavy backpack. It wasn't too bad sitting up front. You did okay. You've done it. I've done it a time or two.
Good job. Yes, good to see you.
So the multi